Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out to our third and final listening session for our rent stabilization efforts. My name is Luis Quixpe. I am the Strategic Planning and Equity Manager for the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development for the City of Somerville. I am the chair of the Anti-displacement Task Force, which is comprised of 3 committees that we're working on. All of the committees are working on anti-displacement efforts in their specialties. The specialties are residential displacement, small enterprise displacement, and creative displacement. So this meeting is for one of those committees. This is the Residential Displacement Committee. They're hosting this meeting tonight. This is in regards to rent stabilization. This meeting will be used in order for us to get contextual feedback on what specific criteria in the rent stabilization proposal will go forth to the City Council for approval. I just want to take a moment here to go over what the format is and some of the general resources available here for everyone as you're coming in. Restrooms are going to be located to the rear of the room. They're going to be right next to the DJ booth, one restroom on either side. We are going to have 2 methods of people providing feedback this evening. The first method is through in-person comment submission, and the second version is through online virtual comment submission. So the way we're going to go through this list is we're going to first go through individuals who are registered to speak ahead of time, and those individuals who have registered to speak ahead of time and have not spoken previously will have an opportunity to provide their input. We're going to start with people who are here in person first, and then we're going to transition to those who have registered ahead of time and are looking to provide feedbacks virtually. Each individual will have 2 minutes to provide that feedback to us. We're asking if you could please make sure that the feedback you're providing is specific to the metrics that we're looking to consider for the home rule petition process. The city has already decided that they will go forward in submitting a home rule petition process, so it's not a matter of like if or when, but rather, or if it's not happening, but rather when. And so we would like our comments to be most effective by focusing on some of the general criteria that are typically included in a home rule petition process. In a moment, we're going to have Jill Currier, one of the co-chairs for the Residential Displacement Committee, explain a little bit about the home rule, the rent stabilization, typical metrics that are inside of it and what we're looking to get feedback from everyone here tonight. But generally, if we could keep those comments to some of those points, that would help us greatly in being able to understand what priorities we should take into making a home rule petition. And just to reiterate, we do not have a draft or a proposal or set anything in writing at this point in time. We're merely going off of research that has happened already with regard to rent stabilization, what typical measures are included in bills by studying them nationwide. And now what we're looking to do is gain that local context to round out that research and determine what should be and what should not be included in that home rule petition draft that's forthcoming. So this feedback is directly going to be tied into that process. So everyone has an ability to look at that handout that we have here. That handout that was given to you when you came in includes the points that we're looking for people to comment on. I'm just going to go through them real quick here. So they're broken down into 2 categories. So tools that are meant to ensure sustainability and affordable rental prices is the first group, and that's going to include should rent stabilization take effect starting the day the law is passed? If not, when should it take effect? An example could be like a year before it was passed. Should income be used to decide who lives in rent stabilized units? How much landlords can raise rent when the lease is renewed? And who would make sure rent stabilization law is followed, city council or a board. And then the other tool package that's included in most rent stabilization laws are, should the rent limit increase if a tenant moves out of an apartment, or can a landlord raise it more? Should property owners be allowed to raise rents if they improve the unit, or if taxes or utilities go up? Should anyone be exempt from rent stabilization law, or should rent stabilization law apply to new buildings or not? So these are the specific metrics that are being considered as part of a home rule petition. So the comments that are speaking directly to these are going to be most effective at being able to help us draft something that is most in line with what the community concerns and priorities are. General comments just stating whether or not you are opposed to or in favor to rent stabilization, unfortunately, will not be able to help us understand the specific metrics here. So I just want to go over a couple of ground rules as well for this evening. More so, what we should all expect from our audiences here and from each other. Just keep in mind the ground rules that everyone is entitled to respect in personal space. If we are up on this podium and you're giving your feedback, you're entitled to have your ability to speak without being interrupted, without necessarily having reactions from the crowd interrupt you or intimidate you in any way, shape, or form. So please, if we could all respect that and offer each other the respect of having that space be respected when you're up here at the podium. If you have conversations going on, if you can keep them to a low level so as to not disrupt or distract the individuals who are providing comment either virtually or here in person. Please be respectful to people's personal spaces and their requests to disengage in a conversation. If someone is saying you're getting too close and would like for some personal space, please provide them that ability to disengage from the conversation. We all know this topic can get very heated, but we want to make sure that everyone has a safe space to be able to participate in this conversation. So I just went over the purpose of our listening session, some of our ground rules, and I'm going to go through the process a little bit of the home rule petition as well. So the home rule petition itself this is not the actual like end all be all. We're not going to have a law anytime soon here. So if you look at the handout, I'm going to go over it in person here for everyone who's virtual as well. The petition process actually starts with the end of this process, which is having a draft of a home rule petition for rent stabilization. That's kind of where the process starts. It goes to the council and the mayor's office for approval. The council will presumably hold public hearing sessions in response to this, and they will review this and they will do their due diligence in reviewing this. And ultimately, it's up to the council for them to determine whether or not this is going to go forward to the next step, which is going to the state legislature. And once it's at the state legislature will do the same due diligence, hold public hearings in regards to this, to determine whether or not Somerville should be allowed to have these laws and any other accommodations that should be made in order for Somerville to do that, such as reviewing the ban on rent stabilization and rent control laws. So the state legislature will do that due diligence, hold public hearings, ultimately make a decision, and if the state legislature then approves this, they send this authorization back to the city. And at that point, the city then has the authorization to enact rent stabilization, but has to go through the process of actually drafting the law. So what we have here is just simply the request for permission to actually do the law writing that we're sending out to the state. And that's what we're focusing on tonight, is coming up with that draft language that asks the state for permission. So the state has to actually give us permission, and then after that, we actually have the ability to write a law, an ordinance. And that's going to have a separate process where we're going to include the public, include commentary from the public, and the council will go through that process again, due diligence of reviewing that, holding public hearings, and voting on the matter. And ultimately, at that point, that would be the final step. If the council approves, then we would have rent stabilization for the city of Somerville. So just to reiterate here, we're very much in the beginning stages. Like if there's a phase 1 through 4, we're at phase 0 right now. This is just the very beginning of the rent stabilization process. We still have to go to the state legislature, comes back to us, and go to the city council in order for us to enact this law. So just give you some feedback on that. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Jill Currier. She is the co-chair for the Residential Displacement Committee. She has been instrumental in leading this. Previous to her, we had Marina Zelaya as the co-chair for the Residential Displacement Committee. Nicole Egbert, who's not here tonight, is also the co-chair for the Residential Displacement Committee, and together they've been leading this discussion and leading the organization of these events. So I just want to give a moment for Jill to come up here and say a couple of words about the process of the home rule petition, like breaking it down, what it means, and giving everybody some context to be able to provide your comments tonight.
Okay, great. I'll give Luis a moment to head back to the laptop. So again, my name is Jill Currier. I'm from the Office of Housing Stability and co-chair, interim co-chair at the moment for the Residential Anti-displacement Task Force. Just want to give people a little bit more context for sort of the very specific pieces that we are looking at when crafting the home rule petition and what we've been discussing. But thank you everyone for coming in person and virtually tonight. We appreciate your time and willingness to participate in this new envisioning for affordable housing in Somerville. So, Yeah, because I can't read out of the back of my head. Okay, so if we want to get, I think, probably straight to the slides, Luis, on the categories that we're looking at. Luis went a little bit over and under the purpose of the listening session on gathering feedback on the specific measures. But these are really the important parts that we want to focus on. So first of all, choice of cap. How should rent increases be capped? This is where we're talking about the actual percentages. So a lot of times, if you're familiar with rent control, you'll see things frequently talking about CPI, like Consumer Price Index. So as we all know, we've experienced those costs ourselves over the last few years since the beginning of COVID, where things get more and more expensive. A lot of rent control is generally tied to the Consumer Price Index plus some certain percentage for up to a maximum percentage per year. That would be the number, basically, that the Home Rule petition would suggest that rents can be raised up to a maximum every single year for a unit. The next one is exceptions to the cap. So what pass-throughs should be permitted? Types of things that we are discussing and that are frequently talked about are capital improvement projects. If someone is putting in a new kitchen, a new bathroom, if there has been extraordinary increases in taxes and the cost of water and sewer, should those be things that we're taking into consideration in the Home Rule petition so that owners are still being able to take those into account? Those would be things that are outside of the normal Consumer Price Index plus percentage and would be above and beyond that standard percentage. So those would be things that should we be looking at that in addition. Exemptions allowed. This is another big one. Generally, when people are talking about exemptions, it's what properties do we not want included? Are we saying that every single rental property should be included? Are we excluding 2-family, 3-family, 4-family, owner-occupied or not owner-occupied? Are some locations go with a date of construction? What properties are we looking at to not to impact where things need to be and also not dissuade future construction from coming to the city? Luis? Okay. We're almost there. Thank you for bearing with us. Number 5, yeah. Okay. Types of decontrol. Types of decontrol means what happens when a unit is vacant. What happens at that point? Questions involve things such as, does the unit go up in the percentage that is set that was discussed in number 1? Is that where we're going for? Does control come entirely off of the unit and the rent is able to be reestablished and then we move from there? Those are kind of the decontrol options on what happens when there's a vacancy and a new tenancy takes place. And then administration. Who controls the ordinance and how? Is there a rent board? Is it left entirely up to the city council? If there's a rent board, who appoints those people? Do they run? What's the makeup of that group in terms of renters, property owners, city employees? Who makes up that environment? So I know that's a lot of information that we're kind of throwing at you, but what we really wanted for this third listening session was a lot of people have already made their opinions known as far as being in favor of some type of rent stabilization or being opposed to it. What we're hoping is to get some sort of real constructive feedback on if this moves forward, which we are moving forward with the Home Rule petition. That is the intent of the City of Somerville, is to move forward with a Home Rule petition for rent stabilization. In that envisioning, what would you like to see? What would you not like to see? What types of properties would you like to see exempted? What would you like included? What are percentages that feel good in terms of increases for rent year over year? What do you think should happen when a unit is vacated? So I realize that that's a lot of information, but hopefully folks have thoughts, and we are looking forward to hearing from you. So, Luis, are you going to be calling on people? I'm getting the 1 second. But again, I just want to thank everyone for your time. I know that we had delays for technology, and I know that everyone is taking time out of their day to come here, whether virtually or in person, and this is the third session that we've done this for, so I do appreciate everyone's efforts.
Today's first speaker will be Ann Tate. Thank you for this opportunity. I missed the earlier sessions. So my name's Ann Tate. I'm a resident of 140 Sycamore Street. I'm a landlord, and I'm a professor of housing design at the Rhode Island School of Design. I've been working in the field of affordable and designing in the field of affordable housing for 30 years. There is no way to build our way out of this problem, no matter what anybody tells you, if you do not address the, protect people from the conditions of an inflated market. There's just nothing you can do to build enough or to build cheaply enough or anything like that to make this happen, and this has been the work that I've been doing for years. I myself was a tenant in Cambridge for 13 years under rent control. My income at that time, I'd just gotten out of grad school, it went up and went down. It was bouncing around a bit. Having a rent control department stabilized my life. It let me not worry about that and get on with other things. I then moved to Somerville and bought a house that had 3 units in it. That allowed us to pay the mortgage. We have always kept the rent low, and I think that, and we're committed to doing that. I think that having a diverse, economically diverse community is incredibly important. And my husband and I totally support doing that. To be specific about these questions, I would assume that the implementation would have to be some kind of rollout, that I worry about the qualification thing of having people's income be income qualified. I can see that that can be necessary, but as I say, sometimes when I lived in the housing, I was making more than would have qualified. Other times I was making less. I think there needs to be some accommodation for the fact that people's lives change, and that stable housing is exactly needs to be that. It needs to be stable housing. I think, raising rents incrementally, should be allowed. I think that having people who live people who live in the housing that they're renting out, as opposed to absentee landlords, is the best system for the city. I think the 2- and 3-family houses in Somerville are what built the middle class in this part of the country, and I think it's an important piece of housing. If we totally exempt it, I think we're missing an opportunity. On the other hand, I can understand the need to make some accommodation and not only apply this to sort of bigger absentee landlords. I think that if tenants move, we need to maintain a stable supply of affordable housing. So there needs to be some way that you can raise it, but not raise it to the stratosphere, which is where our rents are now. I don't think people should be exempt, and I think absolutely a law should apply to new buildings. That may mean that there need to be different kinds of subsidies and construction subsidies and other, a lot of work through the land trust and other things like that. But I think looking for long-term solutions to stabilize people's housing is incredibly important. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Ryan Black.
Hello. Hi, my name is Ryan Black, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm a renter on Chetwynd Road in Ward 7. I'm here to add my voice to the chorus of proponents for strong rent control we've heard across the now 3 listening sessions. What do I mean by strong? Well, to answer a number of the pre-prepared questions and echo several of the ideas many others have suggested across the listening sessions, here's about 7 bullet points. 1, we need a cap on rent increases of 2%. 2, we need a strong just cause eviction protections for tenants. 3, we must not have any building exemptions. For example, to exempt owner-occupied triple-deckers would, those are very common in the city, and if we exempted those, that would leave thousands of renters out in the cold. Also, we can't let real estate interest off the hook by exempting new buildings. Like, that would also leave too many renters out in the cold. We need vacancy controls, that is to say, so don't have rents reset when someone moves out. Absent a provision like that, we risk landlords being able and maybe even being incentivized to, make up quote-unquote reasons to evict tenants so as to have new renters who pay much higher rents. 5, we need any such rent control law to take effect retroactively, meaning to roll back rents to what they were a number of years prior. As the previous speaker said, they're currently in the stratospheric levels. 6, no means testing. That's never a good idea. It also creates a perverse incentive where someone might not want to increase their income to, give up their housing security. And then 7, we need an overall rent cap in actual dollar amounts. To close, more than 60% of Somerville rents. Generally, it is us renters who pay the highest percentages of our incomes towards housing cost. This affordability crisis results in the displacement of an increasing number of our neighbors. Meanwhile, real estate interests profit, exploit tenants in our city off of it. So it's important to remember that rent control alone isn't sufficient to solve the housing crisis. We also need far more policy changes and investments from the city and state government. But if we want to stop the bleeding, we need really effective, really bold rent control. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take some questions from our virtual attendees. Pardon the interruption. We just need a couple of seconds here.
Sorry, 1 second, Owen. Sorry to interrupt. Am I doing the timer on my end, or are you clicking the one that's screen shared? I'm going to start a timer on my end really quickly, Owen. And then, yeah, apologies. It's the first one you're getting, the rougher parts. Okay.
Hello, my name is Owen Burson, pronouns they, them. I'm a tenant in Ward 3 in Somerville. I believe that Somerville needs a rent stabilization policy that is stronger than Boston's, with rent increases capped at a rate of inflation, CPI, with a maximum 5% cap on rent increases or lower, and strong just cause eviction protections. The stabilized rent should be attached to the unit so that the unit remains affordable even if the current tenant needs to move out. Also, legal rights of tenants to organize should be protected. I also don't believe that any rental properties, such as owner-occupied properties, 2 or 3 unit buildings, or new construction should be exempted. Many tenants needing these protections, including my household, live in 2 and 3 unit buildings or owner-occupied buildings. The law should be applied retroactively, and also rent control should not be dependent on tenant income. The reason why I'm calling for these policies to be included is that I have seen too many friends, neighbors, and community members displaced from their homes due to exorbitant rent increases. These rent increases are making Somerville increasingly unaffordable, and because of this, we are losing the diversity that makes Somerville an amazing place to live. I have friends who are artists, musicians, and people of color who have been priced out of Somerville, even though they wanted to stay in their community. In conclusion, Somerville needs a comprehensive rent stabilization policy that provides the maximum protections and stability to Somerville's tenants. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Owen. Next, we have Monica. Monica, you should be unmuted and able to talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Monica De Los Reyes. I'm a renter. I live near Porter Square in Somerville, and I've lived in Somerville for almost 5 years. In that time, I've lived in 4 different apartments, and even though I finished every lease in my place, I've left usually due to poor conditions of the apartment or rising rent costs. I am fully employed, and I spend over 50% of my income on rent each month, and this is for one of the cheapest apartments that we could find on the market when we moved in over a year ago. I am arguing for, or voicing my support for, a strong rent stabilization policy that favors renters, including a cap on rent raises at the rate of inflation, no higher than 5% rent raises in all years, including when the lease is renewed or the building is sold. a retroactive start to the policy at least 1 year prior, but hopefully further back once it goes into effect to lower the current rents, and so that landlords and real estate investors can't raise rents in anticipation of the policy being passed, and no allowances to raise rent for repairs or improvements. Most apartments in Somerville, including the 4 that I've lived in, are outdated, usually sometimes dangerously so, and rent is still raised, generally without improvements or with very minimum improvements. So any improvements that landlords make to most apartments would simply bring the apartment more in line with the high rents being charged right now, not actually add any value. And no exemptions for any properties, including owner-occupied or 2 to 3 unit or 4 unit buildings, as well as new buildings. Thank you.
All right, and then our last pre-registered speaker is Frank. Frank, you should be able to talk.
Right. Hello, my name is Frank Egan, and I'm a renter in Union Square. Of course, long before I started calling Somerville home, the housing crisis has caused displacement and financial hardship for many residents. Year after year, these problems have continued to worsen. I believe the city of Somerville has the unique opportunity to shift the terms of debate around rent control and finally ebb the tide of displacement washing across our neighborhoods. We need a policy that limits rent increases to the rate of inflation with a maximum of 5% per year. Furthermore, these policies must extend to both the unit's current tenants and any new ones. Absent these vacancy controls, landlords will be incentivized to evict their current renters and find higher income tenants. Additionally, any rent control plan produced by the city would be incomplete without a just cause eviction plan to protect the rights of tenants, prevent arbitrary or unjustified evictions, and maintain stable housing conditions within the city. Finally, we cannot ignore the urgent need for new housing construction within Somerville. Ideally, the city would address the problem directly by constructing a large number of government-owned, mixed-income municipal housing developments. Though, given that this kind of scheme is not yet a reality, it may make sense for our current rent control policy to offer a temporary exemption for new development within the city. However, I believe that this should be the only exemption considered by the city. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Next is Kaylee Marcotte.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee. I may have only moved here to Somerville this past January, but I've been a resident of the greater Boston area for a lot longer. I've come to love this neighborhood with all its quirks, the festivals, the art shows, and even more. I've made friends with the neighbors, the dogs on the walking path, and even the local grocers. I would hate to see all of these wonderful people move away from Somerville due to rent increases. Somerville needs to pass a rent stabilization law as soon as possible, including the day that it goes into law. It needs to keep the people who live here from getting priced out of their apartments. The idea that rent stabilization should not apply to all is an oversight. Everyone could benefit from rent stabilization as to prevent landlords from catering to only those with a higher income, thus gentrifying an already diverse and lively neighborhood. Yes, there can be some high-end apartments. That is not something that I'm against, but the idea that they should be exempt will only further create a wealth divide. Keeping rent capped at inflation, or about 3%, would allow those working to stay in their homes, particularly because wage increases, if any, tend to be below inflation rate at this point in America. I also believe that just because someone moves out of an apartment does not mean that the landlord can raise rent dramatically. It, too, should be capped, unless there were major improvements committed to the unit. Too many of my friends have seen their apartments listed for much higher after they've moved out, with zero repairs being done besides quote-unquote the landlord special. If you want to increase rent more, then you must do more to account for that cost. Thank you for your time.
Our next in-person unregistered speaker is Anastasia Eisman.
Hi, my name is Anastasia Eisman. I am a homeowner at Ward 3. I'm speaking on behalf of Strong Rent Stabilization protections. I want to see a cap of 2% because I think capping it at inflation would be nice if everyone's salaries increased at inflation, but right now we're absolutely not seeing that anywhere, and so it would be disingenuous to assume that people could afford more every year. I also want to see that I think importantly, landlords should not be allowed to raise the rents in anticipation of this ordinance, and so we should look at a year rents for a year before, a year prior to the passage of this ordinance. I also want to see robust just cause protections, and I want to see no exemptions to anyone. Thank you.
I'm going to take more questions from our virtual attendees.
Yeah, so we have only one person who has indicated that they want to speak, who is here. As a reminder to anyone who's here virtually, please put your name in the chat. Yeah, so Abba, Abe, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. You are now unmuted and you can speak.
Sorry, my name's Abby Cohen-Dvornik. I'm a Somerville resident, homeowner, and landlord. I have lived here since 1996, first as a renter and then as a homeowner and landlord since 2000. Rent stabilization is good for Somerville, and Somerville needs to keep its diversity of residents, both renters and owners. But we don't need to punish good owners. Consideration for capping the rent increases should be tied to expenses that affect both the landlord and the tenant, inflation, property taxes increases, and so on. And we should consider incentives for improvements that make our housing stock better. Not, I would like to double the price of this apartment because apartments in Somerville are worth more now, not the fancy kitchen, but the wheelchair ramp or the ceiling is leaking in the bathroom. If it cost me $20,000 to fix the bathroom, I should have some way to be doing that, not out of the kindness of my heart, then out of borrowing money from the bank. The landlord should have to do and document the improvement, but it is in our best interest to have the housing stock get better and to encourage landlords to do things like make their apartments ADA accessible or de-lead or do other things that are extremely painful and costful for the landlord to do. I don't think we should have exemptions for anything owner-occupied, date of construction, any of that. I think all the homes in Somerville need to be affordable, stable homes, whether you're a renter or an owner. But we can't. We need to treat both renters and owners fairly, and we need to. Sorry to say, not badmouth the owners. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Adele S.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Yes, my name is Aline Sire. I live in New Till Square in Somerville. And I'd like to say that after charging moderate rent for 4 years, my landlady raised it by $600 for the current lease. And I believe she may have done that because she heard that Somerville was looking into rent control. So I would definitely suggest that there's some retroactivity if there's a cap on raising the rent. I think it might be too late for me, but I think this is already probably hurting a lot of renters in Somerville. I agree with the 5% maximum cap across the board for no exceptions. And I also agree that the landlord should be able to raise the rent by more than 5% only if they have made major improvements that are documented. I think that's all I have prepared, but I agree with much of what was said before. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Yoni. You are unmuted and should be able to speak.
Great. So I'm also strongly in favor, I'm a renter, I'm strongly in favor of the strong rent control, which would cap rents ideally at their present value, as some people have mentioned, perhaps even at what it's been at some point in the last few years, maybe over COVID. In terms of what some of the other speakers have talked about additional protections to enhance stabilization, we definitely need to consider eviction protections, such as maybe a tax on, well, just cause eviction, consider a tax on the eviction process. If you want to serve somebody with a constable, it needs to cost the landlord a bit more money. Also considering making retaliation a finding if somebody has complained about something or has done protected action or union activities within the previous 6 months. If the retaliation statute can go backwards, let's say a year, that would be even better than just 6 months, and to have it be more of a finding than a presumption, so the tenant doesn't have to prove that the landlord didn't have a business motive of trying to make more money. And I also think that not raising rents on for displaced tenants, because that motivates landlords to displace more tenants. Chicago, Illinois has a similar sort of statute ordinance to what I'm suggesting regarding the retaliation, and that's distinct from what Illinois as a whole has. So that might be interesting for people to look at. I believe San Francisco may be a model as well. And I think it's really important for us to have strong renter protections to prevent evictions and to penalize landlords for repeatedly evicting tenants, maybe cap the number of tenants they can evict in a given year. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you so much. Now what I will be doing is briefly unmuting each of the people who has phone called in because they are unable to put their name in the chat. We're starting with the phone number ending 5020. I'm going to give you a couple seconds and then move on to the next person. If your phone number ends in 5020, you have permission to talk. Okay. The next phone number is ending in 5578. If you would like to testify, you now have ability to unmute. Okay. And moving on to the third phone number, which ends in 9609. Okay, that is all for our people who have commented in the chat, I believe. Oh, Nate just commented. You now have permission to talk.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Nate Klauser, he, him. I'm a Somerville resident and homeowner. I live on Warwick Street in Ward 5. I rented in Somerville for 4 years before buying my current one-family home in 2018. I'm here to ask that the task force draft a home rule petition that is much more strongly protective of renters and includes fewer loopholes than Boston's home rule petition. Specifically, the home rule petition needs to include vacancy decontrol as well as a prohibition on rent increases in excess of inflation with an absolute cap of 5% per year. In light of the number of renters in the city who live in owner-occupied as well as 2- and 3-family buildings, the protections of rent stabilization must cover those tenants if this is to be a serious effort at preventing displacement in this city. Rent control should apply to new buildings as well as old ones. It should go into effect immediately upon enaction with at least a 1-year look-back period on rental amounts. It's got to have strong just cause eviction protections that seriously engage with the fact that many evictions stem from changed financial circumstances, resulting in an inability to pay rent. It should not allow banking of rent increases, and I ask that you don't means test its applicability. It should apply to all residential tenants regardless of income. And it should have a robust enforcement mechanism with significant financial disincentive for violations. It should be easy for tenants themselves and/or the city to readily enforce against violators. No one's passive income is more important than my neighbor's ability to stay in our community. I ask the Anti-Displacement Task Force to swing for the fences here. We're in a displacement emergency. Please act like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. So that is through with our list. If there's anyone else who is here virtually who would like to speak, please comment in the chat and we will happily unmute you. I believe we're transitioning back to in-person for anybody else who would like to speak at this point, and then we will come back for virtual again.
Our next speaker is Christopher Lay.
Good evening. I'm Chris Lay. I've lived in Somerville for 18 years, 10 years as a tenant, 8 years as an owner-occupier landlord on Princeton Street. In the order of the prompt points here, to stick to the letters, I think rent stabilization's index date should be at a point before now to prevent or to correct speculative rent increases in advance of the ordinance taking effect. I do not think that income should be used to decide tenancy on any occasion. I think that rent stabilization should follow apartments, not tenants. If the city wants to engage in income-targeted housing policy, I urge us to look to the example of Montgomery County, Maryland's Housing Opportunities Commission, which is right now developing new mixed-income municipally owned buildings, as was the subject of a New York Times article on August 25th. I do not think that landlords should be able to raise rent more than CPI or a number of not more than 5%. Either ISD or the Office of Housing Stability should be expanded to have the administrative capacity to enforce the rent stabilization ordinance. I think an elected appeals board should exist for special cases. I stress vacancy control. I don't think any exemptions on owner-occupiers should be enacted. I think the only possible exemption would be to new buildings and only for 5 or not more than 7 years in that case. Developers don't look beyond that window for their payout. Yeah, I yield my time. Thank you.
Next speaker is Simon Fowler.
Hi, I'm Simon. I live on Willoughby Street, and I rented for 10 years and have owned for 10 years. We bought a two-family so that we could take care of my wife's parents. And the only way we could afford to buy is if they rented downstairs. I guess I just want consideration to be given to the costs of home ownership, so that if it had been capped then at inflation, we wouldn't have been able to repair the back porch foundation or the front porch foundation, or repair the roof, or the imminent boilers breaking, both boilers. So consideration needs to be given to the costs of ownership. I want my children to be able to afford to live in Boston, in Somerville, which they couldn't if we maximize profits as landlords. So I really do want this to be affordable, but as a homeowner, don't want to be prevented from actually taking care of the property. So some consideration to be given to the costs of ownership. Thanks.
Next speaker is Daniel Bernick.
Hi, my name is Daniel, and I live in Union Square. I think that we need rent control that matches the scale of the housing crisis that we're in. I think that this is really a fight for the fabric of my community. So here's what that means. We need to ban rent increases higher than yearly inflation with a maximum 2% cap on increases or lower. We need overall rent caps in actual dollar amounts. We need any policy to include both current tenants and any new ones so that landlords won't just evict their current renters and find higher income tenants. We need eviction protections. We need rent control to apply to small buildings. And we definitely need the ordinance to be retroactive so that landlords can't raise the rent significantly prior to rent control going into effect. So I support being retroactive to COVID-era rents. And we also need to prevent banking or allowing landlords to increase the rent more than what otherwise might be permitted in a year. I think that it's really critically important that this home rule petition address the housing crisis at the scale that it demands. By passing real rent control, I think that we can't afford watered down rent control that gives yet another olive branch to profit-hungry developers. The people of Somerville are counting on you. Don't let us down.
Next speaker is Bert Faulkner.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. My name is Bert Faulkner. I am a landlord in Somerville and have been all my life. It's how I make my living. And that's one thing I haven't heard tonight is about the people who make their living this way. And I do so in an honorable and competent fashion, I'm proud to say. Now, if you introduce controls on any product or service, you are going to water down the quality. For example, I plant flowers all over my buildings. I have the hallways professionally cleaned once every 2 weeks. The snow removal, I'm right on top of it. Not so much now as I'm getting older, but I used to be out there, and I still am, at 5, 6 in the morning, making sure that plow driver is there. And if he's not, he hears from me. I know every spot where the ice builds up, so the salt is placed there. I pay attention because that's how I make my living. Most of my colleagues are like that. Are there bad landlords? You bet. There are terrible ones, and I want nothing to do with them, just as much as you want nothing to do with the bad landlords. It's a tough problem because in a free market, what do you do about unscrupulous people? I don't know, except just don't do business with them. And it is tough when you're talking about housing because you're stuck. This is where you live. And if you have an unscrupulous landlord, get out and go shopping and find people like me. And I will give you a good deal, a functional apartment, and rent increases that are reasonable. That just go up with inflation. That just go up with my expenses. And so that I can make a living and keep the business in good shape. Thank you.
That concludes the list of registered and unregistered attendees who've listed to speak. Before we transition to virtual, if there's anybody else here who would like to speak, you can sign up to do so at the table by the front doors. And with that, we'll transition over to our virtual attendees.
Is there anybody who is here virtually who would like to speak who has not yet spoken? If so, please comment in the chat or raise your hand. We'll give it a minute or two to see if anyone would like to speak. You do not need to have very polished or rehearsed notes. Anything you have to say is welcome. Okay, I'm going to unmute Marianne. Marianne, you should be able to speak. Marianne, we cannot hear you so far.
This is Michael. Marianne is my wife.
My apologies. My phone's too phone to speak.
I appreciate you letting me have this time to have something to say. a couple of things that I just wanted to, kind of go over a little bit in terms of my perspective. I'm a landlord in Somerville. I have 2 3-unit properties, and I have lived in both of them, but not for some time now. But some of my concerns are the caps that don't take into consideration the expenses. Because if we have a cap at 5%, but my expenses have gone up 10%, say taxes, water, sewer, electricity, et cetera, then what? That's just a concern I have. Also, I think there really should be some type of means test to help those that can't afford the current market rents. I've heard of some people saying, well, there should be no means test. Well, you have somebody making 100, 150 grand a year. Well, they can afford a market rent. I don't think that rent control is meant for that. I think it's more for those that are actually being displaced because they're blue collar workers, et cetera. Now, my wife and I were both over 65 now. I can't do the repairs and maintenance myself, which I've done for the last 20 years or so, 25 years. I have to now hire somebody else to do that work because I just can't do it anymore. So I think that, and quite frankly, I rely on that for my retirement because, I don't have a pension. So I think that in terms of some type of a means test or exemption, that should be considered. Back in the 1980s, for a short period of time, I was a real estate broker in Somerville when there was rent control in Cambridge. And the properties that were under rent control were in such disrepair because properties were stuck in a certain, rent. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you for speaking. Is there anybody else who's here virtually who would like to talk who has not yet done so? We are limiting it to 2 minutes of talking time, but please feel free to email the email that we put in the chat if you have additional comments and have already spoken. You can have spoken at a previous session, just not at this one. Let me give it a few seconds and see, and then I'll pass it back to in person. Okay, I don't believe anybody else who is here virtually who is not yet spoken would like to speak tonight.
Our next speaker is Lizzie Rutberg.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Lizzie Rutberg. I am a renter. I live on Magnus Avenue in Ward 2 in Somerville. I'm here because I believe Somerville needs a rent stabilization home rule petition stronger than Boston's, with rent increases capped at the CPI with a maximum increase of 2% per year or lower. The rent stabilization should be retroactive to now at the very least. The rent control should be tied to the unit and not to the renter so that rent can't be increased when a renter, when a tenant voluntarily leaves. I don't believe that there should be exceptions for 2 and 3 unit buildings. That's a huge percentage of the housing stock in Somerville, so that would cut off a lot of people who need this from having it. I don't think it should apply to new buildings either. We also need strong just cause eviction protections and protecting tenants' rights to organize. To talk about what a rent increase means to me as a renter, I'll be brief. A 5% increase to me, what that means is last year rent was $830 a month. This year it's $880. That's an increase of a little over 5%. A 5% year over year Next year, that's another about $50, and then 50 after that, which still won't be enough to stop displacement. Yeah, thank you.
Next speaker is Zoe Dukach.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I think rent stabilization should take effect starting 1 year before the day the law is passed, to make sure that no landlords try to raise it in a speculative manner. I think that income should not be used to decide who lives in these units, because often that serves as a barrier to the very low-income tenants who are trying to access this housing. It becomes another thing that they have to prove, another piece of paperwork, another approval, and that in and of itself is a prohibitive barrier. I think that the rent stabilization should be attached to the unit, not to the tenant. I don't want people to get evicted so that landlords can raise rent. I'm not sure exactly what kind of enforcement would be necessary for this, but I think that we should prioritize efficiency and, once again, making sure that this doesn't become functionally useless based on how difficult it is to enforce. I think that there should be no exemption based on the size of the building, but I think that we do need to make sure that improvements and new construction is still incentivized. I'd not want to see houses falling into disrepair, so I would suggest a very low base increase allowed, something like 2%, but with robust incentives. So if you put $10K into renovations, you can see that reflected in the rent increase. And I think that will incentivize further improvements. But with the actual rent control still being extremely aggressive. I think that about covers it. Yeah, thank you. I yield my time.
That concludes the list of in-person attendees who've registered to speak. We are going to go back to virtual, but before we do so, if there is anybody here who has spoken, would like to speak again, you can do so by signing up again at the front desk. And with that, we'll go back to virtual.
If there's anybody here who has not yet spoken who would like to speak, please feel free to raise your hand. We will be here until 8:30 p.m. So, there's time, but we're back to virtual for a bit. Okay, Lakshmi, you are unmuted and can speak. We cannot hear you yet. I'm still not hearing any sound. If somebody in the chat could give a thumbs up or a thumbs down if they can also hear or not hear. Okay. They said that they would try again in a minute or two. Would anyone else like to speak? Actually, if you want to go ahead and speak now, please feel free, or if you want more time to audio troubleshoot. Unfortunately, we're still not hearing you. Why don't we come back to you in a few minutes? I'm sorry that we're not hearing you. I don't know what to suggest. No need to apologize. So, yeah, and then as a reminder to people virtually, we are, wait 1 second. Luis, are we going back now to people who've already spoken? Because we do have somebody who would like to speak. Okay. Adele, we are coming back to you. You can now speak.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to say that I sympathize with the gentleman who's a landlord and who's making a living out of his property, and I think he apparently does a great job to maintain the property. But I suspect there's a lot of absentee landlords in Somerville. Mine would be one of them, living in Vermont, only coming down to Somerville once a year, and has not been taking care of repairs of all kinds, to the point where the tenants have to take care of them, those repairs themselves. Sometimes, recently I asked if my house could be painted again, because I have been in here 5 years and it really needs it. And even though she raised my rent by 30% this year, she suggested that I do the painting myself. So I think there's a whole range of landlords and landladies in Somerville. I would like, some provision to be made for the landlords who are keeping their tenants happy, but I don't know if this gentleman is in the majority. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else who's here virtually? And Lakshmi, if you would like to try to speak again now before we switch back to in person, we will come back to virtual again before we're done. I'm just handing it back to you for right now, and then in a bit, let's come back to us.
The next speaker is Anastasia Eisman.
Hi, so Anastasia Eisman, Ward 3 homeowner. I just wanted to address some of the things that have been mentioned by folks who are landlords here especially. As a homeowner, if I need to fix something in my house, that is something I do, and then the idea is that I later recoup these fixes that I spent money on and maybe took out loans to do when I sell the house. And I'm not totally understanding why the fixes need to be the problem of the renter. The idea is that a landlord should provide a safe place for renter who pays their mortgage. That's the agreement, which is questionable at best. But I am just not understanding why the boiler needs to be the problem of the renter. And then just like with any investment, I think we have a problem culturally where we have disassociated this idea of risk, specifically with homeownership, where all other investment can go up and down, and maybe we luck out, and maybe we don't. But with homeowning, there's this kind of undercurrent that this idea that it's going to be in our favor no matter what, and anything that remotely presses down on that idea or questions it is met with outright furor or whatever, like opposition. So I want to mention again that I support 2% on cap, just cause evictions, and so on and so forth. Thank you for listening to me again.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak that's in person? If so, you can sign up at the front desk. Otherwise, we'll transition back to virtual. We'll move to virtual if there are any virtual attendees who would like to speak.
At this point, we are welcoming comments from people whether they have spoken today or not. If you are here virtually and would like to speak, please either raise your hand or put your name in the chat. I'm going to try unmuting you again, Lakshmi, and give you first chance here, as I know you've been waiting to speak. Do you mind trying to say something? I'm not sure we're hearing you still. Still not hearing you, unfortunately. I am going to try promoting you to panelist to see if that helps with the technical difficulty. Is there anyone else who is here who would like to speak? Virtually, that is. Actually, it appears that you've rejoined as a panelist. If you want to try unmuting and speaking, please go for it. Yeah. Lakshmi is going to call in instead, Luis, if while they're rejoining, you want to switch back to in person. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Right now, we have gone through our in-person list and our virtual list. Hanalei, let me know if there's any other person in waiting as of right now. But what we're going to do now, since we don't have any further people signed up, we will remain here until 8:30 p.m., but the Zoom audience and us here in person will have some dead air until we have individuals who indicate that they would like to speak. We'll put some chats out there in the virtual environment for people who come in later on and aren't seeing this message, just to remind them that they can notify one of the panelists if they want to provide any input. Likewise, here in person, if you'd like to provide any additional feedback, just feel free to see somebody at the front desk there, and they will be able to take your information down so you can come up and have another round of comments. Otherwise, we'll have some dead air here until 8:30, at which point we will close out the session. But I want to thank everybody for coming out and providing their input. This is very helpful. Our Residential Displacement Committee will be using these comments towards their final draft, which should be coming out this fall. Thank you.
All right. Luis, I would like to go through the phone numbers who are here virtually again, as I don't actually remember which one is Lakshmi's, but they just rejoined by phone. So we're going to start with 9957. If your phone number ends in 9957, you are now able to speak.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hi, we can.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that. But I agree with a lot of what the renters said. I think the only point I want to add is that I don't think private properties should be exempt. I think private properties in particular tend to significantly overcharge people and is limited to a very small subsection of the population, and I don't think that would be fair. I think private properties should absolutely be included in the rent cap. That's the main point I want to make, and I just want to end by saying, I think this is a really great step. Rent stabilization is absolutely important. In fact, I think it's really late, and I think it would be great to identify, when I do empathize with the landlords, but in some cases the city does need to, for lack of a better way to put it, needs to call the bluff about the power dynamic here. It's significantly skewed against the renters. We have renters who are struggling to find a home, and many of the landlords often own many properties, so it's people struggling to find one home versus people who often own multiple properties. But that's all I wanted to add. The key thing being that I don't think private properties should be exempt from this type of rent stabilization. But thank you.
Thank you for speaking. Is there anyone else who is here virtually who would like to speak? If so, please feel free to either raise your hand or put your name in the chat. Okay. It doesn't sound like we have anybody else right now who is wanting to speak. We will be here, as we said, until 8:30 with some quiet time. But if you would like to speak, please either raise your hand or comment in the chat, and we will change the permissions around so you can speak. We have someone who's here who's virtually who would like to speak. Jerry, you're now able to unmute and speak.
Yes, my name is Jerry Cronin. I'm a landlord on Willoughby Street, and been watching the situation unfold with rent control, and I feel strongly that there's landlords that have been in Somerville for generations, and there's those of us that have been there for 10 years or 20 years, and we've invested, me personally, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars into my particular piece of property. And I don't feel that we should be shouldering the burden of a housing shortage. The rents that we charge are very low. We haven't raised our rent in 3 years. And we have great tenants. We don't intend on raising the rent unless there's some kind of a catastrophic occurrence, so we have to do major repairs on the house. But I feel that there's a definite housing shortage in Somerville, and putting the burden on landlords to maintain or to beg for a raise in rent, I think is very unfair, when that's not going to solve a housing issue. It's not going to solve the supply and demand issue. It's just going to slow it down and put the focus in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I'm 100% opposed to it. I remember when there was rent control in Cambridge, friends of mine that owned properties in Cambridge couldn't wait to dump their property because their house was a victim of rent control. Nobody would buy it. They didn't have money to put into it for maintenance. And the housing stock in Cambridge that was under rent control, much of it went down into dereliction. So I am absolutely opposed to rent control from the standpoint of... I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. We only have 2 minutes a person so that everyone can speak.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, is there anyone else who is here virtually? We will, as I said in the chat, be here till 8:30. So please don't feel like you have to speak right now. Yeah. have somebody else who would like to speak, you are now able to unmute and speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just a few points that I wanted to touch upon. One is, the lease contract language that is given to us by landlords. The specific home that we are living in has language saying that the rents can be increased at any point of time during the year, even if we've agreed upon an amount at the start of the lease. I think that those kind of clauses should be removed from the language. The second is I can empathize with a number of the smaller landlords here who own smaller properties and have been here for a long time. But there are large number of real estate companies and management companies that are buying up property and hiking rates at the same time for multiple properties. That should not be allowed. I think rent cap should be based on the lowest income in the specific neighborhood. In this case, in Somerville, the rent cap should be tied to the lowest income rates in the city, and thus ensuring that it's affordable even to the working class. I think that's extremely important. The housing shortage, which I admit is an issue in Somerville, should be addressed by the city. There should be public investment in larger housing projects. And again, if there is any rent increase, it should be based on renter surveys of the landlord's performance. There can't be random increases or based on an arbitrary reasoning by a particular landlord. I empathize with any landlord that does a good job at managing their property, but it should be tied to the renters, what benefits the renters have received for these increases. Also, there should be housing that is provided for families as well as bachelors and people who are attending college. I think it's extremely important to provide housing that is accommodating all of these needs rather than just very minimal area and high rents. So that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone else would like to speak, please just put your name in the chat. We are just kind of going loosely back and forth between in-person and virtual at this point. But yeah. Just letting the people in person know that somebody who's here virtually would like to talk. I don't know if you need a minute to get the timer set up again or anything like that. Okay, I see your mouse moving about. Marisa, you're unmuted and can talk.
All right, thanks for unmuting me. I can't hear anything, which makes it kind of awkward. But
I've been going since 6, so sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I hope you're considering changing the zoning laws so that we can densify before we artificially lower prices. There's a lot of space in Somerville. There's a lot of driveways. There's a lot of buildings that are not very tall. And a lot of these are is because of zoning that you have to have parking to build new properties. You have to have parking. In fact, even when we renovated our apartment, they wanted us to add more parking, which was ridiculous because we have one car for the house. Doing things like that first before we do rent stabilization, I think would really help and maybe make a more natural flow of increase in the housing. I just wanted to state that. I don't know if it's come up before. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Just to note that if anyone who is still here virtually would like to talk, please feel free to either say something in the chat or raise your hand and we will unmute you. We have another person who's online who would like to talk. So please feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and talk.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. We can hear you.
Yes. My name is Mauricio, and yes, I'm living in East Somerville. Yes, I think we need a rent control, however comes out, because I think the landlords already have control from the renters. So now I think the renter needs control from the landlords. And I think they already make enough money for whatever, because the rent's already high on limit. So I think that we should not get any ingress of rent anymore, because already high, and they already make enough money to pay the taxes, bills, and everything from the building. So we need a chance for it.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another person who's online. Brittany, you're now unmuted and should be able to talk.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So sorry, I was just sort of gathering my thoughts and preparing myself. Thank you first off for being here and for allowing this flexible time frame for commenting. I had to get my kids to bed before joining this call, and just really appreciate that it didn't only happen during sort of the dinner hour, which often is the case. My name is Brittany. I am a Ward 4 resident and what I would consider a small landlord. I just want to start by saying that I really support a lot of the efforts that Somerville is making towards creating more low and middle income housing opportunities, both for purchase and for rental. And I support the requirements for large developments, for example, to provide mixed income opportunities, and believe that these efforts, along with increases in like non-luxury housing units, are really the most important way for us to maintain socioeconomic diversity in our city and prevent folks from being displaced. That said, my concern is that often when policies like rent stabilization are discussed, there's little differentiation between smaller owners and larger real estate investment companies. I own 3 multifamilies in the city of Somerville, one of which my family lives in. And I know that there are many owners like myself in the city who, own 1 or 2 or 3 buildings rather than, having a larger number than that. I personally strive to be a responsive and fair landlord, to charge reasonable rent and take good care of the properties where my tenants live. And I know that it's a privilege to own property. However, I'm a teacher, 15 years. I slowly worked towards this ownership, and sometimes I feel like the city is against myself and those in a similar position, just with the rhetoric and the policies that they are pushing for. I feel like there's very little conversation about the high cost of ownership in the city. Property taxes increase yearly because property values are increasing.
That is the time cap. I'm sorry, Brittany.
Okay. Is it possible for me to submit in writing any comments?
Yes, absolutely. I will put the email in the chat really quickly if that works for you.
Okay.
And then for anybody who cannot see the chat, it is adtf@somervillema.gov. And there is no formal limit to however much you would like to email to us. We would welcome all of the comments that you have.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for commenting. We appreciate it. For the person who just joined us by phone, we will be here until 8:30, and if you would like to speak, please use the key on your phone to raise your hand. You're unmuted and able to talk again.
Hello, this is Adeline Syra. I'm a renter near Teal Square, and I'm listening to this discussion, I'm wondering if it would make sense to consider the creation of a standard lease for Somerville, or at least 2 or 3 different models, so that the obligations of tenants and landlords would be very clear. It seems to me that in the 5 years I've been living in Somerville, I get a different lease every year, which is a copy of a copy of a copy of something. It rarely has any of the landlord's obligations clearly stipulated in it. And I'm wondering if perhaps committee would consider the creation of a lease that could be adhered to voluntarily by landlords, but it might be a helpful document for all in the future. Thank you.
All right, the time is now 8:30. Seeing as we have no further speakers waiting here, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to an end. I want to thank everyone here for helping making this happen, all of our staff who was out here in person that you may not be able to see virtually, but it took a lot of staff to make this happen, so I just want to make sure that we recognize the level of support that we have on both sides here. And I want to thank the Armory for hosting us and the great staff and helping us also set up our audio and technical issues in the very beginning. So thank you to everyone who came and provided their input as well. We really appreciate that, and we will be using this information as part of our local context that we're using to inform the upcoming home rule petition for rent stabilization for the city of Somerville. Be on the lookout for that. We should have that out in the fall. That next step is going over to the city council for review. Following that to the state legislature for review, and if approved, back to us to start the process of writing the ordinance. So this is not the end. Keep posted on voice.somervillema.gov/ADTF to get more updates on our progress with the Residential Displacement Committee, the Home Rule Petition process, but also the Small Enterprise Displacement Committee and the Creative Displacement Committee. Our next meeting is going to be the 21st of September, the Thursday. That's going to be a task force-wide meeting, and we're going to be discussing the progress that all 3 committees have had so far and what the next steps are going to be looking for the next quarter for that. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you for coming out. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Luis, there's one last question, which is, will names be part of the record?
The names being part of the record, we have not decided yet. That it is definitely, if you're up here, the meeting is recorded. So all of that information is available and part of the record in that sense. So yes, at the very least, they are part of the recording and any written record that we might have that refers to like comments if they're transcribed. I don't think we'll get them transcribed though. But to answer the question, yes, you should expect that any names or anything associated with these comments when you identified yourselves are part of the record, since our meeting is recorded and is being posted on our YouTube page as well as our Summer Voice page as well.